Hi friends, happy Tuesday. Thank you for those who came to the live lesson yesterday for science. For those that didn't, it's okay. This week we're going to be learning about weathering and erosion and deposition. It's pretty interesting, friends. We get to see how changes are made to the Earth's surface over a long period of time. Last week we focused on the changes that were made quickly, like a volcano that happens really fast. The changes can be made instantly. Earthquakes also happen very fast. Changes can be made instantly. This week is more the focus of changes that happen slowly. So with weathering and erosion and deposition, these all happen over time, little by little, and we're going to learn about them more. Today, though, we're going to focus on weathering. What is weathering, and how does it change landforms and the Earth's surface? So let's get started. I have a quick little thing to read for you, then I have some pictures I want to discuss, and then there's a Nearpod. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so weathering is the process where rock is dissolved, worn away, or broken down into small pieces. So basically, the rock is going to break. You have a full rock, and it's going to break down into smaller pieces or dissolve, slowly crush away. That's what weathering is. Weathering can shape rocks into unusual formations. So they can just look weird, honestly, friends. You know, when we think of rocks, we're used to seeing something a little bit around the round side, or at least resemble a rock, but sometimes when weathering happens, these changes, they change them into different shapes, they can look a little weird or different. Water, wind, ice, and plant roots are all causes of weathering. So, what happens is, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit when I go and show you the images, for the water, friends, sometimes rocks have little tiny cracks in them, right? And actually, you know what? Let me pull it up for you. There we go. So this right here, this rock, we can see it has little cracks in it, right along here. And now what happens is, if the water gets in there and it turns cold, it's eventually going to freeze, right? We know that water freezes. We learned about that when we learned about matter. And when it freezes, friends, ice actually gets a little bigger than water does. So water takes up less space than ice does. Ice takes up more space. Remember, we talked about this way back when we were still in the classroom. We talked about mass and volume. So ice takes up more space than water does. So if water gets all in these cracks and then it expands, it gets bigger, well, the cracks in the rock are going to get bigger. And then it's frozen. And then if the weather gets warm again, it melts. And then it happens again. Eventually, friends, you're going to have something that looks like this. It's going to crack in half or crack into smaller pieces. So that's how water can weather a rock. Same thing like this. Now this rock is cracked in half. Water could have gotten in there and turned to ice and expanded and made the rock crack into two pieces. Okay. The other way was through plant roots. Now, if I look at this giant rock, I can see plants coming out of it. I know you see them too, friends. And I mean, trees don't grow in rocks, but sometimes if their roots are under the rock and the rock is too heavy to be moved or fall, the tree roots will actually break the rock, and sometimes even a tree branches will start growing out of the rock through the cracks in the rock. So the roots will create a crack, and then the trees can grow in those cracks. And that's why it looks like we have trees growing out of rocks, but really all these cracks, that they might not have been there at first. And I'm talking many, many years ago. All right, this might have been one solid rock, and now it's broken up into tinier pieces because a plant or a tree tried growing through it or under it or around it. Okay, another example of weathering would be wind. Now I want you to look at this rock. This whole rock many years ago, a long time ago, was all looked like on the top. It went straight down to the bottom. But now we can see the bottom, it's all different. It looks different. Well, when wind does weathering, it actually brings other rocks or sand, and it takes that sand and those rocks and goes against the rock really fast. And over time, when you have little pieces of sands and rock hitting into that rock, eventually the rock starts to break. Okay? So let's go back to my little passage. So, for example, rainwater can easily enter cracks in rocks. So again, we talked about them, the cracks. When it gets cold, the water may freeze and expand in the crack. The ice will eventually split the rock. Also, plant roots can grow in rocks and cause them to split. So basically what we just talked about, rainwater can get in there and eventually it turns to ice, and the ice expands, it gets bigger, it takes up more space. And eventually your rock will crack, either in half or in threes, fours, all different types of pieces. When you have trees or plants, they grow around the rock or under the rock, and then they come through the rock, all the cracks inside the rock, and that can cause the rock to split, all like here, all broken, into smaller pieces, weathering. And then the wind, like we said, the wind picks up other pieces of sand, dirt, other little rocks that are already in maybe the water around here or on the land around it. And from constantly hitting into the rock, eventually the rock starts to break. All right, so we have weathering, friends. Weathering is the breakdown of a rock into smaller pieces. Okay, so when we hear the word weathering, we think the rock is breaking into smaller pieces. Some reasons why it can do that, or some ways that this happens, is water, ice, wind, and plants. Okay, and remember, these changes take years for it to happen. It doesn't just happen overnight. If you have a rock and it's a solid rock and some water gets in it, and the first time the crack might grow a little bit, but it's not going to split into half just yet. It needs us to do this a few times. All right, friends, so great job. Now you have a Nearpod. Awesome. Bye.